Thank you. We're waiting for one of the speakers. Welcome to this session on a universal basic income, a fair share. We decided to keep the universal. There was a discussion, should it be universal, UBI, or just BI? I think we have the best possible panel to discuss that often called utopian idea. That idea has a pretty long history. Never made it until now. Will change with the so-called fourth industrial revolution, with rising unemployment rates and social insecurity. Welcome, Guy Standing. He's the author of a very good book, just published on UBI. So, all this question will be just, a cyclical debate. There was a discussion in the 60s already, and then it disappeared, came back, very recently. Guy Standing, I will introduce the speakers. Guy Standing is the author of this book I just talked about, but also of a bestseller on the precariat, a new class, a new social class. He's also a founder and co-president of the Basic Income Earth Network. He will kick off the discussion. Quite a few tech entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley and elsewhere are pushing the idea of UBI. Musk, Zuckerberg, and what about Thijs Sondergaard? He's the co-founder of a tech firm in Denmark, Vivino. He will be our second speaker. The UBI is often, in Europe at least, not a left or right question, but we'll have the take of Bill Spriggs. Is a chief economist at the AFL-CIO. Is pretty critical of the idea of UBI, of the premises. He will tell us why, of the premises of the discussion. And Professor of Political Science, Ken Shivi, will address the potential of new political coalitions around UBI. Then we'll go into more practical stuff, that is the Finnish experiment, which is unique, with Marjukka Turunen, Director of Change with Kela, which is the social insurance institution. My name is Alain Janet. I'm a Swiss journalist. As you probably know, the Swiss voted on the introduction of a UBI. Last year it was rejected by 76% of the voters, but the debate was very lively during the campaign. I was myself as other commentators, very amazed. In Switzerland, where the unemployment rate is pretty low still, and where we have, how should I say, a pretty solid traditional work ethics. It was a very lively discussion. I will tell you why perhaps afterwards. So, Guy, the first question to you, very simply. Why? What are the main reasons and justification for introducing a UBI? And perhaps a practical thing. Yeah, you have the system. Wisely, you can ask questions. There will be time for 1-2 questions and comments at the end of the discussion. But you can please use this gadget and ask question to feed in the debate.
Thank you very much. I think somebody who is anti-basic income must have arranged my travel from Charles de Gaulle, which is why I was late. I had a taxi that managed to run into the back of a lorry, so I'm a bit shaken up, but I apologize for being late. I've been working on a basic income for more than 3 decades. And we established the Basic Income European Network, which then became the Basic Income Earth Network. And it's been running for more than 30 years. And the last 2 years in particular, we found that thousands of people from all across the world many, many, many thousands, have been joining the network. And there are a number of reasons that are coming together like an almost perfect storm to make it one of the sexy policy debates. Now imagine if you're in the position of someone like myself who's been working on this for a long time and been regarded as mad, bad and dangerous to know, to suddenly find that you're invited to polite society to talk about a policy like this. It's quite a dramatic turnaround. The book that's just been mentioned, it was an attempt to bring together that 35 years of research and advocacy, and there's a huge amount of research that's been done. Anybody who says that there's little work on affordability, little work on the impact on work, little work on the justification, philosophical or otherwise, just doesn't know what they're talking about, because there's been a vast amount of work done. And I would say, in answer to the specific question, that there are several reasons or justifications for moving towards, and notice the words I'm using, moving towards a system in which we have a basic income as something paid to everybody. And by definition, a basic income is a modest amount paid in cash, paid to everybody individually without any behavioral conditionality. A vast difference from the edifice that has been constructed by OECD countries in the last 30 years. Now, the first justification for a basic income is that it's a matter of social justice. The wealth and income of all of us is far more to do with the efforts of many generations before us than anything we do ourselves. And we have to recognize that. So you could see moving towards a basic income as a matter of a social dividend on the collective wealth of our society. There's also an ecological justice in having a basic income, could be paid out of carbon taxes or something like that. And the justice principle, which has been enunciated since Thomas Paine, in fact, going back to the Charter of the Forest 800 years ago today, or this year, the ethos of social justice is, for me, the most important thing. The second justification is that a basic income would enhance personal and community freedom. Not in the libertarian sense of freedom, but in the Republican sense of freedom. The ability to say no to an oppressive relationship, no to an exploiter, no, and to be able to go forth in society as someone of equal status. For me, that is very important. And freedom is something that we have seen with our pilots in India and in Africa. People who had a basic income were suddenly enabled to say no to cultural oppression, particularly women. Say no to landlords milking them for super exploitative interest rates. Saying yes to wanting to do different forms of work that they otherwise could not afford to do. And the third justification for a basic income is it is the only social policy on offer today that would provide people with basic security. And it's a crisis of insecurity that we face today. And basic security has been shown by the psychologists to induce better mental health, better mental stability, better strategic capacity to make long-term rational decisions. If you have means-tested, behavior-tested, workfare-tested forms of benefit that most states in this room have been introducing over the past 30 years, you do the opposite. You induce insecurity. You induce a feeling you don't have freedom. And you don't have a social policy giving you social justice. But there is a last point, and I'll stop at that. Why I suddenly getting invited by chief executives of a big corporation to go and talk, invited to Davos to go and talk, invited to the Bilderberg group to talk about basic income? This doesn't happen to some person like myself. Why it's happening is because of the phenomena associated with Donald Trump and Brexit. Suddenly, polite society is becoming dirt scared, and correctly scared, of populist neo-fascist movements. And unless we reduce the inequalities and reduce the chronic economic insecurity experienced today by the precariat, we're going to have more Donald Trumps. And I, for one, don't want that. I think a basic income is not a panacea, but it should be seen as part of a new distribution system suitable for a globalizing economy and a 21st century society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. Perhaps, if I may, one other reason in this discourse on the fourth industrial revolution and the massive destruction of jobs. That may be another reason. Thijs, as a tech entrepreneur, what is your perspective on UBI, on the future of work, on this disruption leading to the destruction of jobs?
Sure. So first of all, I want to say I agree with every single word the guy said, so that's pretty boring. But I do have was it a fourth or a fifth reason to talk about UBI in my book, and that is the whole agenda of automation and the role that technology is playing and will be playing moving forward. My perspective on this is that there are great reasons to talk about UBI today, and I think we should, and I think we need to take seriously the fact of implementing UBI slowly today. But I also think that we are in a situation where I view it as inevitable that we do need a different form of redistribution. I'm looking at this from the inside of the machine room. I'm the IT entrepreneur who is supposed to be the creator of job. That's what my politicians are telling me. That, hey, it's great what I do because I'm creating these new high-value jobs. And that is true, but I look at myself not as a creator of job, I'm looking at myself as a destructor of jobs. I am convinced that for every single job I create in Vivino or previous companies, I am, with the way I'm doing it, I am destroying 5 to 10 other jobs. And this is the nature of the technology we're building today, and we need to realize that. We need to realize that previously, and when we look back in history, automation has been about automating repetitive manual labor. And that is now changing. It is changing into automating cognitive, analytical, and non-repetitive work. So these are complicated, what we look today as relatively complicated tasks. Within, it could be wealth management, it could be customer support, it could be repairing the self-driving trucks that's no longer gonna crash you into the truck in front of you, hopefully. These are completely different types of jobs that have never been automated before. And one thing is this new type of automation, which I think is the reason why this is different from all the previous occurrences. The other factor is speed. This is happening faster than we think it is. And I believe I witnessed this from the inside. So this for me is the main reason to look at UBI. Today, we will be moving into a world where we will have vast parts of the population that are not just unemployed, but that are unemployable. When Donald Trump is trying to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, he's riding a mega trend, which is why I think, unless he's indicted, he'll probably win a second term. But he's riding the mega trend of bringing manufacturing back to your home market. But that's not the same as jobs. When today you're building a factory, you used to build a huge parking lot so that all your employees could have a parking space. Now you build a huge parking lot and then you place solar panels on it so that you can power the machines inside. This is how manufacturing is now returning to the US and returning to Europe. And this is not going to create jobs here.
Okay, we're getting interesting, thank you. we're getting interesting questions from the audience. Pretty philosophical questions like if UBI becomes a reality, how do we ensure that children appreciate the need for an education to get on in life? We'll come back to that later. It's important, but we'll talk about that later. Bill, you don't agree with Thijs. You don't agree with the arrogance, if I may say, of the tech entrepreneurs from the Silicon Valley, as we discussed before. So what is your take on UBI? And perhaps first on this diagnosis of what's happening with the fourth industrial revolution.
So we've had many instances of automation already involving skills, not manual skills, right? We, in the United States, went through this in the 1990s when we essentially got rid of what used to be called secretaries. These are now office computer operators. The problem is we don't pay them as that. So we replace 20 women with 2, but those 2 women are very tech savvy. They know how to do everything on the computer. They are the frontline accountants. They make the system work. We don't pay them 10 times as much. We don't pay them 5 times as much. We don't pay them 3 times as much. This is the problem, the key problem that we're facing right now that's creating the Donald Trumps, that we are not sharing with the workers their productivity increase. And we're not even redefining the work. We don't even think of these women in the offices as computer savvy. We still think of them as secretaries, and people still, we don't call them administrative assistants. But the reality is these are computer workers, but we don't vision them that way. In Silicon Valley's view, when Amazon has a delivery worker who is 10 times more productive than your average retail worker, they view this as some low-level delivery worker. I don't need to pay them 5 times as much or 3 times as much. So our big problem is a view of workers and a view of their relationship to their productivity. That has to be rewarded. And without that, we get what was feared at the beginning of the 20th century, which was that robots will replace us. This is an old theme. We did get a problem. We had massive underconsumption, and we had a huge Great Depression from it. It's not economically sustainable if workers don't get their productivity. Now, having said that's not the reason, because what we need to be fighting for, and we should be clear, is that workers get the productivity gain. But we do need a universal basic income for many of the reasons that Guy laid out, and that is that our current systems are too complicated for our current world. We cannot anticipate all the worthy people versus the unworthy people. We can't anticipate this. In the United States, when we had the oil spill in the Gulf, we had to figure out, okay, who gets aid because now they don't have a job because of this oil spill, because that doesn't fit in any other current frameworks, or it didn't fit the current frameworks. In Great Britain, there may be a need for people in those shops to get some sort of special aid, because it may be some time before those shops can get people to come back to them. We're going to have these kind of attacks. We're going to have hurricanes. We're going to have things, flooding of our cities from rising water level, from global warming. All of these things are going to create situations in which we can't anticipate, and we don't know how to fit them into current models, and we need to stop worrying about it. We need to have an assurance for workers, and we need to have a system that gets them an income and lets them know that they can plan their lives. We have put too much risk on workers. Across the OECD, workers now bear too much risk on their incomes. So we need a basic income so that we can return to workers that certainty, so that they can plan their lives, so that they can make the investments in the human capital that they need to make, so that they can be mobile, so that they can get to where jobs are located, relocate themselves. We need to have a social compact between all of us, because we don't know when the winners and the losers will occur. We don't know when these events will occur. And so we need to have an agreement beforehand. And governments, we have now found, through the austerity that they continue to pursue through this so-called recovery are reticent because in their politic, they don't want to admit that they messed up. So they don't want to help anybody. They'd rather see us drown. Well, the response is no. People know that there's a life raft, and they're not going to volunteer to drown. So yes, they will choose more Donald Trumps. So if you want fascism, then keep starving people. But we know that governments can do better. That's the reason we need the basic income. It's because we need to get past this kind of problem we didn't anticipate. We always thought that politicians would see that and respond to it. They have not. So that's why we need the basic income. But we need unions to go after these high-tech guys who think that I can pay you whatever I want. There are millions of you. I'm going to make you suffer. You're going to be starving if you don't take my job, so I can pay you $2 an hour. No, no, and no.
Just a quick response from Thijs before we go to Ken.
Yeah, I don't see how you can just remove supply and demand dynamics from this. It's true that the secretary today does a completely different job from what they did 50 years ago. But it's not worth 20 times as much, and I'm not going to be paying 20 times as much, especially not when I have 5 million people outside my office willing to take that job. I just want to say, though, I think it's wrong to talk about, hey, we gotta make sure that the workers, it's for the workers' sake that we do UBI. No, it's for the humans. It's for the society. It's for everybody. That's the point about UBI. And I do think that we need to redistribute, and I do think that unions pay a massive or should play a massive role. But what you just need to do is you need to tax me and companies like mine 10 times higher than we do today, because taxing income tax is going to be like taxing horse food. You can do that, but it makes no sense because it's not going to be a very big economy in that. You should be taxing corporations because that's where the productivity gains is, and that's where the revenues are.
That's a good quote. Write it down.
Walter Ruth, the president of our United Auto Workers, was going through a Ford plant when we mechanized them with Ford, and Ford is looking at, this is Etzel, not Henry, looking at the robots, and he says, "Oh, I bet you're really upset that you can't get union dues out of those robots." And Walter Reuther said, "No, I'm worried because those robots can't buy cars."
Ken, at the beginning of the discussion, we said this debate on UBI is not just a question of left and right. Do you agree? What is your take on UBI?
In thinking about UBI as in all public policies, I do think it's important to ask the question of what problem is UBI going to solve, and that it's solving a problem that we have rather than fears that we have in public policy making. And I do want to just comment briefly on this idea that I think sometimes this debate about the impact of technological change on the future of work is one in which it is certainly the case that technological change has in the past and will, even in an accelerated fashion in the future, destroy work, destroy jobs, create some jobs as well. But we really, I think, make a mistake when we focus on the kind of partial equilibrium analysis and when we're just looking at in one industry rather than how economies adjust to technological change in a general equilibrium fashion. And so I do think the case for UBI is going to have to be because it's a good incomes policy rather than our fears about the future of work. But on the question of is it a good incomes policy, and to get at really your question, is I think it has a real potential to address an important trend in advanced industrial democracies. Most of these societies have become increasingly more diverse ethnically and racially and socially. And what do we know about the impact of diversity in generating long-term political support for incomes policies? Well, our experience over the last 50 years is one in which we should be concerned about that support. When we look at differences across, as soon as we target incomes policy, which is what we've been doing for the last 50 years, the conversation moves almost immediately to the question of deservingness. Do the people that we're focusing on, targeting our policy for, do they deserve assistance or not? And beliefs about whether or not people deserve that assistance have shown to be correlated with ethnic and social diversity in society. So if we want to explain differences across individuals in their beliefs and support about public policies, their beliefs about deservingness are correlated with things like ethnic diversity. And it explains variation across time and across countries in support for incomes policies that are targeted. And I think one of the really exciting things for us to think about with respect to UBI is that it is universal, that it is something like a citizen's income, and it doesn't end around on the deservingness debates that go along with targeted policies. And I think that suggests a possibility, although perhaps not a reality yet, in that basic income debates can, in some ways, generate new political coalitions for supporting incomes.
Thank you. Thank you. Now let's go into practical experiments with Finland. Marjuka, what makes the Finnish experiment so unique?
First of all, I need to say that I think that experimenting is very good, whether it's taking place in Finland or in anywhere in the world. And of course, our government has been keen on experimenting other things than this basic income. So we have to remember that this is only one action we are taking in Finland to renew our social security and get the information. And why is experimenting good? Experimenting is good because before we didn't have the information about this kind of mechanism of basic income. Is it good or is it not good? And so we will get that information. But I also believe that we will get lots of information to renew our social security system in Finland too. What makes this Finland's experiment so unique? It's nationwide. We have a small country, and the decision making is centralized, so it was possible to do it like that. And of course, the experiment is it's obligatory, so these people don't get to choose whether they want to be in it or not. So the results will be more reliable. We didn't discuss it whether we want to go there or not. And do you want to be in this experiment or not? We just suddenly announced these customers, that we are doing this, and you are now in this experiment. So the result will be reliable, more reliable. And of course, it's based on legislation. So we made a law about this experiment. So it went past our parliament and our constitutional committee in our parliament, saying that this is not against our constitution, trying these kind of things. So that makes it kind of more special than the other experiments. But as I told you, I think that it's really important to experiment this kind of mechanism in every country, if possible, because it gives lots of information about this mechanism.
Under a center-right government.
Yes.
And one of the main promoters was a billionaire, I don't remember his name, an entrepreneur, Finnish.
Our prime minister. Yeah.
So,
no, it is the case that when we look at the underlying public opinion data, what you see in some countries is that when we line people up either on a left-right ideological scale, or if we line them up according to a left-right partisan identification, that in some countries you see a real attraction to UBI because of it simplifies the welfare state system, it reduces bureaucracy, and it generates the possibility of giving people responsibility. It provides a floor, but they're responsible then for the upside. That said, we have to have a caveat. In countries like the United States, we've looked at this same data, and UBI is a left-right issue just like any other welfare state issue. There's almost no support among Republicans and strong Republicans, or even independents, for a basic income. So there's a lot of variation across different countries to the extent to which UBI is generating new political coalitions.
Thank you. So let's go to pilots. Guy, you were involved in many pilots in industrial countries, in developing countries. What are the main lessons learned from those experiments? And perhaps you are still living in Switzerland. Very short. What did you think of the result of these initiatives in Switzerland? widely rejected. I must. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Some of you who may know a bit about Swiss politics, they have a referendum system, and you first of all have to get 100,000 signatures, which are validated, to get the motion into a referendum. The group that was set up, all amateurs without any money at all, a bunch of young people enthusiastically wanting to promote basic income. And I joined them. I was by far the eldest participant. And they managed to get 141,000 signatures, which was a significant achievement in itself. And we were doing very well in the referendum. And I spoke in a number of big conferences, much bigger than today's. And we were doing very well. And then one idiot, and he's not a friend of yours, he went on television and he was asked, well, how much should the basic income be? And nobody was authorized in the campaign to say any amount. And the referendum motion, which I've quoted in my book, says that the amount should be determined by Parliament depending on resources, etc. But this chap said 2,500 Swiss francs a month. At that point, our upward curve in the opinion polls went nosediving. But I will conclude that I'm extremely proud, unduly proud. I tease my fellow advocates in Switzerland about it, is that the two cities where I campaigned, in Geneva we got 35%, and in central Zurich we got 54% support, even though that calamitous thing had taken over. So the whole world was saying, Swiss vote against 2,500. But that was actually not what the referendum was about. But before we get too distracted into the Swiss situation, let me go into the pilots in general.
And we'll go back to the Finnish experiment, because I see a lot of questions, going back to
what
Marika said.
I've been marginally involved in advising Olli Kangas and the others in the Finnish experiment. It isn't exactly a basic income. It's only paid to the unemployed, 2,000 unemployed. But I think what it's going to show is some interesting conclusions about the need or otherwise to force people to prove that they're looking for work. They're looking for jobs. And in that respect, it does something which is a really important aspect of the basic income debate. Current systems of means-tested social assistance inevitably involve huge poverty traps, where somebody going from receiving a benefit into a low-wage job that the precariat can typically obtain face a marginal tax rate of over 80%. In Finland, the estimate is close to 100%. In Germany, it's over 85%. In Denmark, in Britain, even the government admits it's over 80%. Now, no middle-class income earner would accept that without going on rioting into the streets. Be honest. But we expect the precariat to face poverty traps of over 80%. That's the reality. But it's worse than that. Because if you lose your job tomorrow, do you think you start receiving benefits the day after? Of course you don't. And it turns out that millions of people wait for months before they start receiving their benefits. So that, to me, is a shocking outcome of the existing systems. And when you think of alternatives, we are thinking of alternatives to the existing system. Now we go to pilots. I've been involved in a number of pilots, and I look older than I probably am because of my involvement in pilots. Nobody should go into a pilot thinking they're going to come out feeling great. It's an arduous, very taxing experience. The best one we've done is in India, where we provided 6,000 people with a basic income for nearly 2 years, paid individually to men, to women, and to children through the mother. And we've written a book about the results, and the results are roughly similar to what's happened in Africa, where we've been doing them as well. Essentially, they can be divided into welfare improvements, improvements in nutrition, in health, healthcare, sanitation, schooling, attendance, and performance. Improvements in equity. Women, the disabled, frail people benefit more than others. Improvements in economic activity. People who have basic income security work more, not less, and are more productive, not less. And let me just conclude. And the fourth one, which is most important, is that the emancipatory value of a basic income is greater than the money value. And I'll leave you with that as a puzzle, but the evidence as produced in the book is very strongly in that direction.
Thank you. Of course, we're running out of time, but I would like to address the central question. Does basic income reduce or increase work incentives? Yeah, I know it's too early to assess the Finnish experiment. What is your feeling and your first impression?
Well, we have been getting feedback from the customers, and I think that those people who have had the problem with the part-time jobs, that they need to bring every 4 weeks the application, the paychecks from the employers, and wait for the processing of the application, and then wind up in the situation where they don't know how much money will they get and when is the money coming, and they are eager to do the job anyways. For those kind of people, and I think lots of more, but it's a good mechanism, and they like it, and they think it's very positive, and they now can start their businesses again, and they can start living again, and it feels their dignity is back, and they feel they got back their citizenship. But I think that basic income is not the mechanism for everybody. The free money is not for everybody. These other actions must be taken. You need some other support for those kind of people who think that they don't want to work at all. They just don't want to, or they need mental care, or they need some other kind of support. And we have to kind of like find these people and find the right way to support all of these different groups of people.
Same analysis for the incentive to get education. That was a question asked by the audience. The UBI doesn't reduce incentive to get education. What is your take on that?
We did an experiment in the U.S., a very large experiment. It guaranteed an income and worked through a negative income tax, but it assured you that no matter what, you would get so much per family. It overemphasized what would be the work effort. And from my perspective, it didn't incorporate what is the general equilibrium effect if I know for certain. It ended up being more like I won a lottery. It came with counseling. So there were people who were counseled and got the negative income tax guaranteed income. There were people who didn't get the counseling. The counseling didn't seem to make that much difference. It really was the tax, because there's a cutoff between when you work and when you stop getting the guarantee, and that was more important. But again, to Guy's point, the complexity of the current systems in the U.S. We now have companies that pursue workers who claim unemployment insurance. Because our employers get experience rated, the more unemployed workers, the higher your unemployed tax. So they actually go after the workers. And there are firms that are hired to make sure that the workers don't get unemployment insurance. You have to go through a gap in the United States in order to get the unemployment insurance. There's a gap in the United States in order to get disability. People who apply for disability under our Social Security system, we have found never work again, but all of them don't get certified as being disabled, even though we know they never work again. All of these things build in time delays. We have people who enforce the law so that if you got your unemployment check and you weren't supposed to, that we will retrieve it, including people who have that gap in the 2 weeks before you get your paycheck, but they take the unemployment insurance because they have 2 weeks with no income. And that's a violation. So there are all these hidden costs that people have to pay in order to access the systems that we currently have. And so I think it's hard, even within an experiment, to truly appreciate and understand the transformations that would take place. Now, many people don't trust that we would, in the U.S., come up with a basic income sufficient to get you benefit levels for current programs. And that mistrust is part of why people don't want to do it. They know with certainty, they think, the access to the current system, so they don't want to give up the known for this unknown because they think the subsequent benefit is going to be so low that they'd rather take their gamble on what we currently have.
Thank you. We have time for one question. Yes. I know it's frustrating. It's a yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I was interested in the mention of the downscaling of, say, secretarial jobs from 20 to 2, and the observation that they are in both cases, or are presumed to be, women. And in this room, previously, there was a talk around gender equality, and it's a question, I suppose, for Guy, and in terms of, say, the social justice perspective, whether a universal basic income will address gender inequality, or whether it might actually alleviate political pressure for achieving that. And then if so, how do you mitigate that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Sorry, it's only got to be one. I very strongly believe that a basic income would be a powerful feminist policy to improve the position of women. It's not a panacea, we know that. In our basic income pilots in Africa and India, we included questions addressed to men and women separately about who, in their opinion, benefited most from the basic income. And overwhelmingly, among men and women, the answer was women. And the emancipatory value, I can illustrate with, if I may, with just a short anecdote. When we were doing it in one of the Indian villages, at the beginning, all the young women were wearing veils. And after about 9 months, I happened to go back to that village. And I said to one of my Indian colleagues, I said, "Have you noticed a change here?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, none of the women are wearing veils." And we asked some of the women to come across and talk to us. And eventually one of the women said to us, she said, "You know, before we had to do what the elders told us to do. Now we have a bit of money ourselves, we decide for ourselves." That is emancipation. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to, we arrive at the end of the session. Would like to thank the panelists and you for your participation. But one last question, 2 words from each of you. We asked the question at the beginning of the discussion. Is the current debate on BI a cyclical manifestation of public anxiety, the fear of losing one's job, or is it a debate here to stay? Mariuka.
Well, I think that, I hope that it's a debate here to stay, or it leads to a bigger renewal of social security systems.
Okay, Ken?
I do think it's responding to current trends in the labor market, but I think those trends aren't going to go away. So we're going to be talking about this in 10 and 20 years from now as well.
Thank you, Bill.
I think uncertainty is increasing. So I think we will continue to search for how do we reduce risk on workers. Workers have had the entire economic risk of our society put on them. We have to figure out ways to mitigate that risk for workers.
Thank you. Thijs?
Yeah, I think it's both. There are great reasons to talk about UBI even without taking automation into the question. For me, automation makes it inevitable, but we can discuss that. I think we're running towards an amazing future where we're going to finally unleash a lot of creative potential, like since the agricultural revolution. I think it's awesome that you say that the recipients of your program are your customers. I think that is an amazing mentality. So I think it is inevitable. It's not just cyclical, and yeah, it will happen.
Thank you, Guy. I said you would have the last word, but 1 word, 2 words, not more.
It will be 12 from now. I end my book by quoting Thomas Paine, who, in a remarkable document in 1795, concluded, "Time determines whether an idea is adopted, not reason." And I think the time is fast approaching when it will be seen as a good thing for a good society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I wish you a very stimulating forum.